Welcome to another episode of our videocast, today with Frederike van Oorschot. We are very pleased that you are joining us today. We, that is the Schaufler Lab at TU Dresden, an innovative research collaboration between humanities and social science scholars and artists who, under the guiding theme of data worlds, conduct research on the socio-technical and cultural synthesis of new realities, funded by the Schaufler Foundation. You can find more information on the Schaufler Lab at TU Dresden on our webpage or in the first episode of this videocast. I can highly recommend the 2 episodes of the videocasts that are available so far on YouTube by my colleagues Niklas Ekberts and Nelly Seibel. This episode will follow the same structure as the others. First, our guest speaker will have time for a short presentation on her work. After this, we will discuss a few questions on today's topic. These 2 parts will be recorded. After the recording stops, we will have more time for an open discussion with the members of the Schaufler Lab. My name is Marie Briese. I am writing my dissertation in theology about the question of intersections between right-wing populists and Christian fundamentalists on Instagram. Digital theology and digital religion are the research interests that I share with today's excellent guest speaker, Frederike van Oorschot. Associate Professor Dr. Frederike van Oorschot is a Protestant theologian and head of the Department Religion, Law and Culture at the Forschungsstätte der Evangelischen Studiengemeinschaft in Heidelberg. In 2013, she got her PhD in theology with her dissertation on public theology in the face of globalization. She worked as a research associate at the universities of Hanover, Karlsruhe, and as a substitute professor at the universities of Zurich, Heidelberg, and Bonn. As a head of the Department Religion, Law and Culture, Frederike van Oorschot is the author and editor of many interesting publications. Forthcoming, there is a textbook on digital theology. And besides that, I want to highlight the journal Cursor, Zeitschrift für explorative Theologie, which she co-edits, and her latest project Syslex, an online encyclopedia for systematic theology. I'm very grateful for your innovative work in our discipline and feel honored that you join our videocast today. We will discuss dimensions of data and the digital in theology and beyond. Since theology, with its monastery schools, forms the origin of universities, and since digital humanities can also be traced back to the efforts of Jesuit priest Roberto Busa, it is time that we invite a theologian to be guest in our videocast. Now, I'm looking forward to your presentation, Frederike van Oorschot. Please share your screen.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me and this kind invitation and introduction. And you already mentioned some parts of what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes. The project I'm involved in, on with, and about digital data. So what I want to do is to give you just a short insight on my perspective on the understanding of data coming from the field of theology. And I try to differentiate between 3 dimensions on the theological approaches, I would say, which are a theology on data. So how do we think about data? What is data? How could we relate to that? Theology by data, which I would call computational theology. And then thirdly, the theology with data, which would be a hermeneutical approach and how to understand digital data and how this is related and maybe shaping theology so far. What I try to do is to give you an insight in the work I'm doing and try to relate that into a broader strands of theology called digital theology. So it's a correlation of the 2, and we can discuss whatever is of interest for you later on. So let me start with the first section of theology on data. As Marie just mentioned, we are kind of based or find ourselves based in a field called digital theology with this question. Digital theology, the term was coined by 3 US American authors, Pete Phillips, Kyle Schieferbein-Guerrero, and Jonas Kohlberg. Well, it's American and UK based, actually. And they suggested in 2019 a 4-fold understanding of digital theology. They said digital theology is the use of digital technology to communicate or teach as a traditional academic subject. Second, the theological research enabled by digitality. Third, the intentional, sustained, and reflexive theologically resourced engagement with digitality. And fourth, a prophetic reappraisal of digitality in the light of theological ethics. And under this very broad umbrella term of digital theology, there's an emergent research field which is growing until today. And I tried to structure this field in an introduction I wrote 2 years ago to kind of clarify the different dimensions of how theology is related to digitalization in different ways. So what we do in theology, what I see is that we use digital tools for doing theology. This is what I would call computational theology, and I'll come back to that just in a couple of minutes. We use digital spaces to have like podcasts as we do today, or blogs, or online journals. We have debates on how to understand digitalization or the digital cultural changes, and this is where we also think about how data can be understood theologically. And then we find ourselves based in a cultural dynamic and a cultural change, maybe, which is brought to us by digital media. So I would say we have kind to think about our own place in this cultural dynamic, and I would call that the theologies of the digital. And I think it's helpful to differentiate these different dimensions when we talk about theology and data, to say what is the approach we are taking, what is the angle we are taking when we think about data. Is it a debate about data, or is it working with data, or is it the more broader cultural understanding we're trying to cover? So that's the field of digital theology, and let me just zoom into two aspects I would think are, for me at least, are the most important or the most interesting ones, which is computational theology. So how could we use digital tools to do theology, and then to think about the digitality or digital data as a topic of theology within the field of theological hermeneutics. So secondly, how to do theology by data. We started here in this very first essay, as far as I know, on the theological uses of data. Clifford Anderson, a US-American theologian, stated that there is highly no interest in digital tools in theology as such. And I hope that we change that, and at least it changed for me in the cooperation I am part of in Heidelberg. We have it's called Theolab, a consortium on computational theology, and I learned a lot there, so I just want to mention it to give tribute to that. That's the place where I learned how to do theology by data. And we just recently published a first volume of a compendium, how digital methods could be used within theology. The second volume will be out next year in March, hopefully, where we have different sections for the theological disciplines and how they could use computational methods. It's all open access, so you can have a look on that if you're interested in that. And the thing I'm working on mostly in Theolab is is in the projects I'm part of, is the question of how this doing theology with or by data changes the practices of doing theology. Because what you need, I would say, is you need a collaborative approach. You need transparency of your methods. You need a certain kind of openness in how you conduct your research. And you have to, you find yourself within a broad field of political and economic agenda setting, because doing digital theology or doing digital humanities is part of a large political agenda as well. So it changes the way we do theology, especially when you come from a very traditional field of research, which I would say theology is. So let me give just two brief examples. Marie just mentioned in the introductions as well. So one would be Cursor, which is an open access, open science journal with this space for, as we call it, explorations, where you can work in collaboration. In writing, you can have open reviews on whatever you're conducting in research. This is where I published a piece on theology as open science with a computational researcher together. And you can have a look here of how this works when you have like the opportunity or use these digital tools to conduct a theology, which is more based on collaboration, on transparent annotation processes, and transparent research review processes here with this platform. And the other one was just mentioned as well, which is Syslex. It's a new online encyclopedia, open access online encyclopedia on systematic theology, which is trying to open theological academic discourses to a broader public who might be interested in getting some insights in what theology does. And there is the article if you're interested in learning more on digital theology in here, just as one example how this looks like. And as I mentioned, these different ways of doing theology by data change the scientific practices in doing theology. And one question which is really striking me, and I'm still really struggling with that, is the way how this changes our epistemology and our hermeneutics. So how could we understand what we are doing? How could we understand the data included in this? And how could we kind of reflect on the translating processes between theological knowledge production on an analog way and the theological knowledge production we see, which could be data-based or data-driven, like in these examples. And I would say, or would argue, that we need something like a digital data hermeneutics here. And I mean, we have one of the great heroes of hermeneutics in our field, which would be Friedrich Schleiermacher. So we need something, according to Schleiermacher, which is the art of understanding data, right? So what are the imaginations we face in the fields of humanities of what data is and how data could be interpreted? What might be processes to kind of get through these questions on a valid and scientific way? So I would say we need something like a research and discussion on the question of the socio-technical imaginations of data, and we need an art of understanding data, and this is what I would call data hermeneutics. And this is kind of opposed into what Gabriele Grammelsberger, Aachen-based philosopher, just suggested, I think, a year ago in her volume on digital philosophy, is that there is an opposition between data and hermeneutics. That you could either work data-based or you have to think about understanding, because that's what Grammelsberger suggests, is that there is a contrastive understanding of data-driven sciences, which are not interested in epistemology or in hermeneutical processes, and then the old way of doing humanities. And I would rather, and you see just some examples from the, I would say, older debate, which in digital humanities is about 10 years ago. And I would rather argue for a complementary view, right? We have a vast amount of literature until now that data is kind of a very complex concept, and that we have to think about what data actually is. Is it a vacant sign that needs kind of a reference, which is extra symbolic, which means that it is not based in the data, and therefore needs interpretation processes? And how could we understand these, and how could we relate these to the different hermeneutical approaches we already have in theology? How is the data-based work and computational knowledge related to each other, right? How is the annotation work, the data interpretation work related to the other forms of knowledge we're used to conduct in theology? Is there something we might need, such as a data constructivism, right? The understanding that data is this kind of vacant symbol we have to fill. And how could we do that, right? And we have to relate that to parts of code hermeneutics and algorithm hermeneutics, which are, I would say, other relevant fields of doing digital hermeneutics, but this is not the question we are dealing with today. So what we see here is the question on data in theology is based or related to the vast question of the theory of knowledge and how to generate knowledge, how to distribute knowledge, and how to do this in a scientific, valid way. And I would love to discuss with you how we could face these challenges, how you would address these questions from your different disciplines. And I would want to strongly argue to look for ways to do theology on, by, or with data related to the cultural dynamics we're in, data-driven and according to the open science principles, and hermeneutically informed. Because I think that it really enhances the way we do theology, enhances theological research, because, and this is what I want to close with, as Leibniz said, it is unworthy to waste the time of outstanding people with calculations, because even the simplest person can write down the results reliably when using the machine. So there are things which could be done by machines, even in theology, and I don't want to waste the time with this, doing it myself, but thinking about how we could relate the results of the different machines which work data-based with what I'm interested in as a theologian. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Frederike. Also for bringing up these questions for the discussion later on with the whole Schaufler Lab. But now we have some other question for our moderated discussion, but we keep your questions in mind. Maybe we take a step back and think about theology and your understanding, because even if there's this often cited founding myth of the digital humanities, not everyone understands the importance of theology in this whole field. So what is your understanding of theology? And as a second question, what is unique about theology with regard to data and the digital? And why do we need theology in the time of data we're living in? You named a few examples, but maybe you can elaborate more on this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, I think it's a twofold argument here, right? There is not much interested within theology towards data-driven sciences, and the other way around. So it's kind of a back and forth, I would say. But let me just maybe start with a short story. We have this digital humanities cooperation thing all around Germany, and they didn't have any place to think about method and to think about hermeneutics and to think about epistemology, right? And in the minute you introduce data-driven approaches into a field of humanities, you face the question of how to relate the numbers to work with the text, or to work with the art, or the work with the pictures, or whatever the research is you're conducting. And I think the question I just mentioned on hermeneutics and epistemology is exactly this question about how to transfer, how to relate, how to maybe translate, I don't know. And there, I would say, is a specific it's a specific contribution theology could make, right? I mean, we're pretty used to that question. We're relating different media practices from the beginning within the field of theology. So we have this back and forth. We're not really good with numbers, but we're good in hermeneutics, right? And we're good in interpretation, and we're good in epistemology. So what we did in the DHD, the Digital Humanities Germany network, is that we founded a group of people thinking about the hermeneutics and epistemology. And this is where most theologians met. There are some philosophers as well, and it's mostly from the other disciplines. It's questions, right? How do you do that? And I see a lot of expertise here theology could bring to the table. a lot of expertise from other people as well. We could learn a lot in the fields we're not as good as we are in hermeneutics. But I would say this is really something we could bring to the discussion.
Yeah, you mentioned also the translation processes that we have to do. And I have to think about the Hebrew language. It is known for being ambiguous. One Hebrew word can mean so many German or English words. And this always makes theology a matter of interpretation, as you just said, which also requires, a lot of translation work. But data, on the other hand, is unambiguous, whether it's a binary code or tokens or statistics. It seems to be very unambiguous, at least. Theology and data seem to speak two different languages. And how does this influence the theological reflection on data? And what other challenges does the increasingly digital world pose for theology? Hermeneutic circle between data coding and theory is maybe the key word to answer this question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very good question. It kind of brings me back to the debate I had with Gabriele Grammelsberger, who's exactly like forcing this view of like data is the unambiguous thing, and what we do as philosophers is thinking about the ambiguous. And I would say that's not true, right? And most computational researchers I know at least are very aware of that their data is pretty ambiguous and in need of interpretation. Yeah? I mean, you have the different data, but this is exactly what data constructivism means, right? That in the data, you have different relations, extra-symbolic relations to different possible interpretations. We have this famous saying of Johanna Drucker that data is kapta, right? It's something you kind of catch, right? You catch from a vast amount of interpretational possibilities. And I think Hebrew is a good example, right? Because if I have a data, I think I have the same question, right? How do I translate that? How do I refer to, how do I contextualize the data I have in bringing it to a proper understanding of what it would mean? And this is exactly what we learn in translation processes, right? It depends on the context you catch the data, as it depends on the context of where you kind of catch the Hebrew words, right? You have to look in the context, and then you have to decide how you interpret it, and you have to be open, and you have to be transparent on the decisions you make here. And I see a lot of the last, I would say, 2 years or something, there's a broad debate on that, on data interpretation, data hermeneutics, code hermeneutics as well, because we have the same processes here, and I think we could learn from the fields who are really like experienced in the translating of different forms of languages, and even like different forms, I would say, of knowledge, right? Data knowledge is another form of knowledge than text-based knowledge is, and this is kind of or practice the knowledge which is caught in practices, right? And as theologians, we are trained in relating the different forms of knowledge to one another, and I think this is exactly what we need to do in the field of digital humanities as well.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned also the context, and in your presentation, the political agenda setting that needs to be taken under consideration. What are the challenges that we face there as theologians, maybe also in regard to ethics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of money in doing digital data-driven research, right? And I think it might be part of the growing interest of some fields of the academic work towards data-driven research and computational research. But at the same time, I mean, it's the same, I think the same discussion we have with other forms of third-party funding, right? If you approach the political agenda only because there's money in that, then you will have to adapt your research program in a way that is not really useful. So I would say, or what we tried to do in the second volume of computational theology, is that we invited experts from the different fields of theology and asked them what they could imagine would be interesting case studies for their discipline to use computational methods with. And I would say this should be the way to approach this. But at the same time, I see, at least at the universities I'm based in, that there is an urge of working computationally or having a look on that. And I think, there are good reasons for that, right? It really changes the way of knowledge distribution in the society we live in, of knowledge production. It's an issue of justice, as you mentioned, ethics, right? The accessibility of knowledge is an issue of justice, I would say. So we should think about that and maybe leave some of the more historical oriented path of theology for a moment, maybe only, and lean into these questions coming from the digital transformation.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the forthcoming second volume of your work on computational methods, and can you tell us something about the methods that they are used, or the examples? How can we conduct theology with digital methods? Do you have examples?
Oh, well, that's the big question, right? Well, we have in the first volume, we had scholars from all different fields of digital humanities, and they wrote introductions to the current methods which are used in digital humanities. So you kind of have the tableau or the field of the different methods that could be used. And we invited theologians to read the first volume and think about what they think might be something worth applying. And then there are fields like practical theology, where you have a lot of research on, like, as you conduct yourself, right? As on social media practices, religion on social media, these kind of questions, digital worship services, these kind of things. We have a lot of digital ethics and theology at the moment. And then there are fields like my own dogmatics, where I wrote a contribution together with a colleague. And we thought about how maybe it would be nice to kind of use the potential for the understanding of how theology develops, right? So this kind of more historic approach. So we don't have an overview at the moment about maybe all the publications in theology in the 20th century. And computational methods allow us to get an overview on what was published and what issue, what might be network analysis tools reveal to us on the way theology was conducted, what might be topic modeling reveal us about the question of how things became an issue within theology. And I think this is just a huge possibility to look into that, apart from our own very limited view on what theology might be. So these are just very few examples on this, I think, 700 pages volume or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's a new form of theology that is evolving here. Maybe time is an interesting thing to talk about. How is it possible to combine theology as a science that refers to ancient text, Hebrew, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, or ancient written sources in general, and questions of the digital that relate to the present or the future? Do we see a shift in theology and theological questions here?
Well, actually, I would hope to see a shift. I don't know whether we see one, but well, this is what I tried in this to kind of sort in this table, right? There are a lot of possible ways to use digital tools for the interpretation of ancient text. We can learn a lot from digital history here, and from digital archaeology and all these kind of related fields, right? But if it comes, and this is how I understood your question, if it comes to the interpretation of the digital as a question of current temporal, current societal changes or transformation, I would say we would need a theology who is a little more attentive to current phenomena. And I see a lot of that in practical theology, and I would love to see more in my field of systematic theology. I'm actually working with a group of people on digital ecclesiology. So the question of how church is changing through digital tools and the use of digital tools and forms of digital religion is addressed a lot in empirical studies and practical theology. And my question would be, how does it change our understanding of church, right? This is something I would call an inductive approach. So an approach which starts with the observation of different forms of church in everyday life and the current world, and then try to reflect with the help of the theological traditions and the model of thought we have there, and a lot of interpretational work done in the last 2,000 years, to make sense of that, to understand that, to try to interpret that. But this is a pretty new thing, I would say, at least in German-speaking theology. It's a pretty new thing and how to do systematic theology.
Mm-hmm. In the current theological discourse on digital technologies, data, and also AI, I mainly see discussions about the godlike nature of technology or its anthropological implications. However, there are also many ethical issues to consider. For example, when it comes to the exploitation of our planet or click workers, data capitalism as a key word. And at the same time, churches are increasingly using technologies and claiming that this is the future and the way to be relevant as a church or theology in the present and in the future. I would like to see maybe a stronger or more public debate on ethical issues, because we as theologians maybe can speak up for our planet and all the people that are exploited by AI. To speak very broadly, if we come to a Christian ethic for data, can we apply such an ethic to all people, even those who are not Christian? What is our standpoint there, or what can we contribute to an ethical discussion about data and AI?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, that's a big question, right? And I just want to mention that the Protestant Church in Germany, the EKD, just recently formed a group of people who will work on the AI ethic thing. So there will be in the Kammernetzwerk thing something, and the EKD Synod started someone working on that. But that doesn't really answer your question on what we can contribute, right? And I would say it's the same question we face as theological ethicists all around the ethical questions, right? If we give like an orientation in the question of war conflict studies, right? We just had the Friedensdenkschrift published by the EKD on the question of pacifism or just war, just peace. And I mean, it's one voice, right? It's a plural society. We're getting less and less attention as churches for the approaches we bring to the table, but we still do, and we can still work in this environment. And I think, I mean, it depends on what we offer, right? Nobody listens to church anymore because church is speaking, but if we have something interesting to say, if we have research or experts in the field who could really contribute something relevant to the debate, I would hope that we could use the attention we still got for introducing these perspectives. But that would mean that we work way more interdisciplinarily on theological ethics, so that we don't end up like thinking about the theological imaginations of God, the human, and technology. And I really love this myself, right? I mean, this is something I'm trained with. I'm good with imaginations and big stories, so this is something I really could contribute something. But if it comes to ethical questions, we need the experts in the field. We need ethics on the laboratory floor. A colleague just once coined it, right? Someone really working with the people who are developing the technology, who really understands what they are doing, and then develops something with them together, hoping that then something comes out of that, an orientation which is really helping and enriching the debate, and therefore will be heard. So I think that should be the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. You proposed the concept of mirror imagination, Imagination, to describe the relationship between AI and a reflection on it. Could you please elaborate on that and maybe answer also the question, is this an opportunity for theology as it remains or becomes relevant? Or is it also a risk for humanity and thus a failure of theology because too little is said about the material conditions and implications that technologies like AI have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you. Another big question. Well, I introduced this description at the end of an article where I kind of did a literature review, right? I tried to surveil the publications within theology on AI and trying to describe what are they doing. And what I saw is they are doing very little AI ethics, and they are doing a lot of what I would call socio-technical imagination or imagining things, with a very interesting peek in the question of the imaginations of God and the imaginations of the human, which is not based in that technology. So let me just very clear on that. This is based on the minds of the theologians thinking about that, and that might be of value at some point. But this does not. I mean, this should not be confused with digital ethics. So this is, I would say, theologians trying to make sense of a development they are facing in the world, but not in an ethical sense, but in the way of theological anthropology, theological ontology. So it's more, I would say, theology-related, self-centered thing. And I wouldn't say that this is a failure or something, or making something relevant. It highlights possible dangers of the development when it comes to post-humanism, transhumanism imaginations, and might be helpful to bring that into these debates. But for the field of ethics, it is way too... We had the colleague working on sci-fi, right? And this is way too sci-fi in a way. And we're helping with the contemporary questions, which are like data security, clickbait, ecological aspects of digital technology. I mean, this is the questions I would say we need to address when it comes to digital ethics at the moment, and not the question of like the transhumanist unity or resurrection in digital technology thing or something. So I would say these are completely different fields of interest and debate at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would second that. I was also thinking about the understandings of reality and truth that clash when we combine theology and data science. What is your understanding, of reality and truth that are clashing there?
Yeah. Just 2 minutes for this kind of question. Well, at first I'm not that sure whether we see a clash here. I see a lot of very careful considerations in the field of with the data scientists I'm working with, as like every analytic or statistic people is very careful about the interpretation of their data, right? I mean, they're way more careful usually with their data than other people are who just approaching the data, making something out of it. So I don't really see a clash here, but it really an interest or a very careful consideration of the question of what are we really seeing here? What can we describe, and what is beyond the description the data could offer? I see a new debate on the question of constructivism on the horizon, and because relating the data always, in a way, I would say, is constructing a form of reality we see through the data. And we need to think about the question, how could we relate these realities to one another? And this is something I think we can see, or we have a debate on that, like on the political implications or societal implications on that, on this filter bubble thingy, right? This was, I think, was part of it, right? We have these different realities shaped by the interpretation of one's own surrounding through, for example, social media. And the big question is, how could we relate these? And this, I would say, is part of a question of a political data hermeneutic. So I don't really have a solution here. And I'm the last to say that theology is about truth or something. I mean, we are offering, I would say, one interpretation of reality. I would say we offer one kind of augmented reality approach here, so that we say there is a godly reality within, between, and beyond what we can see here. But this is one interpretation we bring to the table of very, very different interpretations. And I would just, again, as I said earlier, that we are aware of having different realities on the table, and that we are trained in negotiating different approaches of reality, trying to make them, to describe them, trying to analyze them, trying to bring them into conversation. This is something I think we need to start with. And I hope that theology can contribute something here.
I feel like this awareness for the whole complexity of the worlds, the data worlds, need to be transferred to the broader public. Do you have any ideas how to do this? Do we have to do Sunday services on data and AI, or how can we approach this science communication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the most important questions we face in the academic world at the moment, right? And I'm really, for theological reasons, I would say this needs to be a thing in theology, because we have a discipline which is related to a public institution, which is based on public education, the public educational system in Germany. So we need to use this somehow. But it's still searching for something. And I think we need to do as much as we can in the different fields, right? Why not having a service? And I really like that IKD and Kirchentag, for example, they always have like parts of the program on these questions. We are more and more having in the teaching curriculum, we more and more include digital theology, digital ethics. This is something. Maybe we need some more, like, maybe even like just podcasts like you have, videocasts on that, right? Which could transfer that. I don't think that there's one solution on that. I would say do as much as you can open access, so that people just have the possibility to approach when they're interested, and to include it as much as you can in the different publics you're surrounded with, right? That could be church public, that could be teaching public, that could be political publics. Be engaged in the interdisciplinary debate, to be seen and to be heard. But I don't really have an answer like this is the one fits it all thing. And just mentioned the projects I'm involved in, which are like part of this searching process, right? Hopefully doing something.
Yeah, I also feel like that this is the way to go. Yeah. Thank you for your time and the interesting insights in the role that theology can play in a data world. I hope your work inspires other theologians to join us researching digital theology in all its dimensions, and also motivates scholars and scientists from other disciplines to take theological perspectives into consideration for their own research and data.